You won't believe how quickly Hayden Panettiere's tragic final emergency unfolded. At roughly 1:51 p.m., responders were sent to an unresponsive woman. Minutes later, the situation had escalated to cardiac arrest, CPR, and dispatch references to a possible overdose. By around 2:31, she was gone. But that terrifying 40-minute window still leaves one huge question. What really happened during those final 40 minutes, and which details are confirmed facts versus assumptions people have already turned into conclusions? If you value careful reporting without rumors, subscribe to U.S. Crime Cases, stay with me, and let's follow the facts wherever they lead from here. To truly understand the reality of this situation, we have to start by completely stripping away the loud internet rumors. We need to ignore the gossip and look exclusively at the confirmed timeline of that Sunday afternoon, August 16th. Usually a Sunday afternoon is quiet. People are resting, getting ready for the week, and just living their normal lives. Then, at approximately 1:51 p.m., the reality in that South Carolina apartment completely shattered. The Greenville Police and Emergency Medical Services received a frantic call regarding an unresponsive woman at the residence where Panettiere was staying.
Everyone infantry response for cardiac arrest, Judson Mill Lofts, 701 Ainsley Bridge Road, apartment. Mr. 1, minute 29 responding.
Ainsley Bridge Road, overdose, CPR is in progress.
This morning, a newly obtained police report reveals new details about the shocking death of star actress Hayden Panettiere and who investigators say was with her when she died. According to police, Panettiere's on and off again boyfriend Brian Hickerson and his brother Zach were also there at this South Carolina apartment complex when Panettiere suffered a cardiac arrest, and they say the brothers called 911.
Have a cardiac arrest, CPR is in progress.
Think about how sudden that truly is. 1 minute, it is just a normal, quiet weekend. And the next, someone is fighting for their life on the floor. When a 911 call like this comes in, the response from the city is immediate. I see how incredibly hard that job is for the dispatchers. They sit in a room miles away, listening to someone's absolute worst nightmare unfold through a headset, trying to remain calm so the caller can give them the address and the details. The radio traffic between the dispatchers and the officers moves incredibly fast. They have to take fragmented, panicked information from whoever is on the phone and translate it instantly for the police units and ambulances on the road. They noted the absolute severity of the situation right away. The dispatch log officially marked it as a cardiac arrest. They also confirmed over the radio that CPR was already in progress at the scene before the first police cruiser even pulled up. It is incredibly heavy to think about. We were talking about a 36-year-old woman. She had her whole life ahead of her. She had a family who loved her deeply, and suddenly, without any warning, her heart has stopped. The sheer panic in that room must have been suffocating. Wow. It is just incredibly sad when you strip away the celebrity aspect and realize a young woman was slipping away while someone desperately tried to keep her breathing. It was during this rapid, chaotic exchange of critical information between dispatch and the responding units that the phrase possible overdose was referenced over the emergency communications. Now, I see why people react so strongly to that. That single fleeting phrase was picked up by scanners. It leaked out onto the internet, it was broadcast across countless headlines, and it was immediately treated by many people as the definitive, absolute answer to what happened to her. People heard those two words and decided the case was closed. But we have to stop and look at how emergency services actually operate in the real world. When dispatchers hear the words unresponsive young adult and cardiac arrest in the same sentence, their protocols require them to prepare the incoming medics for absolutely anything. Mentioning a possible overdose over the radio ensures that the paramedics arrive with the right equipment ready to go. They need to walk through the door with Narcan and specific airway management tools in their hands, just in case that is what they are dealing with. It is a precautionary working description meant to save a life, not a final medical diagnosis. The police and the medics are communicating in quick shorthand to get the fastest medical response possible to the person suffering, right? It makes total sense when you look at it from a first responder's perspective. But as we walk through the evidence, you will see exactly why treating a preliminary dispatch label as a forensic conclusion is incredibly irresponsible. The authorities themselves have not confirmed it. Greenville Police said they are still waiting on official forensic results. We have to separate what a dispatcher said in a split second to rush medics to a scene from what a medical professional actually determines weeks later. Jumping to conclusions based on a radio code strips away the dignity of the person we lost and ignores the actual verified facts that investigators are currently working with. When Greenville police officers arrived at the apartment complex, the fight to save her life was already well underway. First responders from the local fire department and EMS were on the ground, actively performing chest compressions and attempting advanced cardiac life support. If you have ever been in the same room as a severe medical emergency, you know how intense and terrifying that environment is. It is fast-paced, it is loud, and it is focused entirely on resuscitation. The police officers stepping onto the scene had to stay out of the medic's way while simultaneously starting their preliminary visual investigation of the room. According to the police report documented by a responding officer who carefully observed the surroundings, there was no obvious physical reason visible to explain why she was unresponsive. Greenville Police said there were no immediate signs of physical trauma, no signs of a struggle, and no external factors that would clearly explain why her heart would just stop. The responders were not looking at a scene that immediately explained the medical failure. They were simply looking at a patient in critical need of intervention. The medics were pushing emergency medications, managing her airway, and doing everything they were physically trained to do to try and get a pulse back. It is a heartbreaking image to hold in your mind. You have highly trained professionals throwing everything they have at a situation, sweating and working tirelessly, trying to pull a 36-year-old woman back from the edge. They did not care about who she was or what the headlines would say. They just wanted to save a human life. But there's a harsh limit to what medicine can do. The medical teams exhausted all of their emergency protocols. They pushed through the advanced life support measures for an agonizing stretch of time, hoping for a miracle. But despite their sustained, desperate efforts, the resuscitation was unsuccessful. The timeline then reaches its devastating conclusion. The official police report documents the time of death as 2:31 p.m. Meanwhile, the coroner's official account lists the time as 2:32 p.m. In the rush to find conspiracies, some people online immediately pointed to this minor discrepancy as proof that something strange was happening behind the scenes. They started throwing out wild theories and accusations just because of a 60-second difference on a piece of paper. Right? When people are grieving or shocked by a sudden death, they look for someone to blame. They look for anomalies because the truth is too hard to accept. They see a 60-second difference and they think they have cracked a massive case. However, it is absolutely crucial to recognize this for what it genuinely is. It is a simple 1-minute reporting difference between two distinct agencies logging a deeply chaotic event. Think about the reality of that room. A police officer looks down at their watch or their radio display and writes down 2:31. A paramedic or the coroner notes the official end-of-life-saving measures on their medical chart and writes down 2:32. It is a simple record-keeping detail, not a mystery. It happens in almost every single major emergency response across the entire country. Within roughly 40 minutes, an emergency call for an unresponsive woman ended in a tragic pronouncement of death. 40 minutes. That is all it took for everything to end. But this timeline, as exact and verified as it is, only tells us how fast the tragedy unfolded. It gives us the precise boundaries of the emergency window, but it leaves so many critical questions completely unanswered. For instance, the timeline does not tell us who made that crucial phone call in the first place. It does not tell us what the responders were told by the people in the apartment when they walked through the door. And it does not tell us what investigators found when they started thoroughly examining the rooms after the medical equipment was packed away. We are left looking at the very beginning of the official investigation. The clock gives us the structure of that afternoon, but the human elements and the documentary evidence left behind in the apartment are what truly define the next layer of this story. If we want to understand how the public perception shifted so quickly and what the police actually secured as evidence, we have to transition unto the people who were there and the physical items the police took note of during those initial hours. We owe it to her memory to stick strictly to the facts, step by step, without letting emotion create lies. As the medical response came to a close and that unbearable silence settled over the room at 2:32 p.m., the entire nature of the scene shifted in an instant. The emergency medics, who had spent 40 intense minutes pouring every ounce of their energy into trying to revive her, had to pack up their equipment. At that exact moment, the location transitioned from an active medical rescue unto a formal police investigation. When a young woman dies so suddenly and unexpectedly, law enforcement officers cannot simply walk away. They have a duty to secure the apartment, interview everyone present, and piece together the timeline of her final hours. This is where the story shifts from the immediate panic of the 911 call to the quiet, methodical work of gathering facts. Before we go any deeper into the official reports and evidence, we have to pause and remember the human heart of this tragedy. Behind all the headlines, the radio chatter, and the public curiosity was a 36-year-old woman whose life ended far too soon. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend, and someone who had spent years sharing her life with the world. When news like this breaks, it is so easy for people online to treat it like a mystery movie or a puzzle to solve. But I see how devastating this is for the people who truly loved her. Her family and friends were suddenly forced to process an unimaginable loss in the full view of the public eye. Dealing with sudden grief is hard enough on its own, but having that grief picked apart by millions of strangers makes the pain so much heavier. As officers stepped into the residence to conduct their preliminary checks, they documented exactly who was in the apartment when the emergency unfolded. According to the official police incident report, Brian Hickerson and his brother, Zach Hickerson, were both present at the scene. Brian was known to the public as her on and off partner over the years, a relationship that had previously drawn significant media attention. His brother Zach was also staying at or visiting the residence. Having two witnesses right there on the scene gave the responding officers an immediate point of contact to ask basic questions about what happened prior to the 1:51 p.m. call. That brings us to one of the biggest points of confusion that dominated early news coverage, the identity of the person who actually dialed 911. When the Greenville Police Department issued its initial public press release, authorities described the caller using the broad term, an acquaintance. However, as journalists later obtained access to sections of the partially redacted incident report, news outlets reported that the documents indicated Brian and Zach Hickerson made the call. Right, when you first hear those two different descriptions, it is easy to wonder why the language does not match up perfectly. Many people online immediately began speculating that the police were hiding something, or that a mysterious third party had been in the apartment and fled before officers arrived. But if we look at this with refined detachment and simple common sense, the reality is much less dramatic. In early press statements, police spokespeople often use generic legal terms like an acquaintance to protect the privacy of witnesses and avoid releasing unverified names to the press while an investigation is still in its opening hours. The police report itself reflects the raw details taken at the scene, showing that both brothers were involved in contacting emergency services. Whether one brother physically dialed the numbers while the other spoke to the dispatcher, or both talked to authorities during the emergency, the public record simply reflects two slightly different ways of describing the same event. It is a procedural nuance, not a hidden conspiracy. If you haven't subscribed to U.S. crime cases yet, please click that subscribe button now so you never miss our honest, fact-based breakdowns of ongoing stories. Now, let's look at what the responding officer actually documented during those initial, frantic moments inside the home. When police officers first crossed the threshold of the apartment, paramedics were already on the floor actively performing CPR on Hayden. The scene was loud, chaotic, and focused entirely on trying to restore a heartbeat. While the medical crew worked, the responding officer made quick contact with the people in the room to gather critical context. The incident report notes that Zach Hickerson spoke to the officer right away, identifying Hayden as his brother's girlfriend and letting law enforcement know who they were treating. Later, after the medical personnel officially declared that resuscitation efforts had failed and the room went still, the officer was able to sit down and speak with Brian Hickerson in greater detail. He was asked about her recent activities, her health, and what led up to finding her unresponsive. However, when you look at the public incident report released by the department, those key portions of the conversation are completely blacked out. They are redacted. I know how frustrating that can be for people looking for immediate answers. When key sentences are blocked out with thick black ink, minds tend to race toward the worst possible assumptions. But we have to understand why police redact information in an active case. Police said that redacting witness statements in an initial report is standard procedure to protect the integrity of an ongoing investigation. They do it to keep private medical history confidential, to protect witness privacy, and to ensure that potential evidence is not compromised before investigators can verify every single claim. Just because a conversation is redacted does not mean a crime took place. It simply means law enforcement is doing its job by keeping sensitive details protected until the full investigation is complete. The incident report also contains brief observations regarding how the brothers behaved and reacted while the emergency was taking place. In high-profile cases, commentators online love to dissect these brief sentence fragments, trying to judge whether someone acted too calm, too panicked, or suspicious. But wow, we have to be extremely careful here. Trying to judge a person's innocence or guilt based on how they react during a sudden life or death trauma is completely unreliable. Psychologists and forensic experts will tell you that human beings react to horrific trauma in completely unpredictable ways. Some people scream and break down, others go totally numb and appear detached, and some become hyper-focused or confused. An officer writing down a brief, one-sentence observation about someone's emotional state is simply logging what they saw in a split second. It is not a psychological evaluation, and it certainly isn't legal evidence of wrongdoing. We cannot let emotion or bias trick us into turning a person's shock into proof of a crime when law enforcement has made no such claim. Next, we have to address the physical evidence collected at the scene that fueled intense public speculation. According to the police report, Brian Hickerson voluntarily showed the responding officer a bag of medication that Hayden had been taking. Much like the witness statements, the specific names and types of medications listed in that report were redacted from the public release. Naturally, as soon as news broke that a bag of medication was handed over to police, people started making massive leaps in logic, assuming that prescription drugs were directly responsible for her passing. To make matters even more intense, subsequent reports surfaced indicating that Narcan was present inside the residence. For anyone unfamiliar, Narcan is a brand name for naloxone, an emergency nasal spray specifically designed to reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. The moment the public heard that Narcan was present at the scene, many people felt they had all the proof they needed. They connected the early dispatch radio call mentioning a possible overdose, the redacted bag of medication, and the Narcan, and they declared the case closed in their minds. But right here is where we have to pause and look strictly at what the medical and legal facts actually tell us. The presence of Narcan in a home does not automatically mean an opioid overdose occurred, nor does it establish what was in her body when her heart stopped. Today, Narcan is widely distributed and kept in millions of households across the country as a standard emergency safety precaution, similar to having a first aid kit or an EpiPen. Having Narcan in a room simply means the medication was available in the environment. It is not proof that it was administered, nor is it proof that opioids were the cause of the medical emergency. This brings us back to that heavy, loaded phrase from the initial radio chatter, possible overdose. We need to be completely clear about what that phrase actually means in the context of emergency medicine. When a 911 dispatcher sends out paramedics to an unresponsive person, they use standardized working descriptions. If a caller mentions that someone is unexplainably unconscious, dispatchers will often broadcast possible overdose so that incoming first responders prepare their life-saving tools before they even walk through the door. It allows paramedics to have Narcan and specialized airway equipment ready in their hands the second they step inside, saving precious seconds. Police said explicitly that possible overdose was an initial working assessment by first responders during a high-stress medical emergency, not a confirmed cause of death. It was a preliminary label used to guide immediate medical care, not a final finding from a coroner. The most dramatic phrase in this entire story is actually the one thing that official authorities have not confirmed. To uncover what really happened, we cannot rely on early radio codes or unverified online theories. We have to look at what the physical autopsy revealed, what the coroner found, and what the ongoing investigation by law enforcement and federal agencies is actually uncovering as they wait for the final toxicology reports. When we finally step away from the loud, chaotic noise of those early emergency assumptions and look directly at the hard forensic evidence, the entire picture changes significantly. We really have to remember that while the internet was busy spinning wild theories based on a few leaked radio codes, the actual investigators and medical professionals were quietly doing their jobs. They were securing the scene, transporting her respectfully, and beginning the incredibly difficult process of figuring out exactly what went wrong inside her body. The preliminary findings from the coroner's autopsy provided a major piece of this deeply tragic puzzle. The coroner officially reported that there were no signs of trauma that contributed to her death. Right? This is an incredibly important detail. When a young, relatively healthy 36-year-old woman passes away so suddenly, the immediate fear is often that something violent or sinister occurred. But this medical finding aligns perfectly with the official stance of the law enforcement agencies involved. The Greenville Police stated clearly that their preliminary investigation found no signs of foul play or suspicious circumstances. I see how people read a statement like that in the news and immediately assume the entire case is closed and resolved. However, we really must understand the precise meaning of those official law enforcement statements. Police stating that there is no foul play indicated is absolutely not the same thing as saying the exact cause of death is known. It simply means the initial physical evidence does not point to a violent crime. They are looking at the room, they are looking at her body during the autopsy, and they are saying that nobody forced this to happen through an act of physical violence. This brings us to a part of the story that has generated a massive amount of heated debate and anger online. While Brian Hickerson's presence at the apartment drew intense public scrutiny due to his prior domestic violence convictions involving Panettiere, the police have not announced any evidence tying him to her death. We have to hold tightly onto the actual facts here, even when it is hard. I know it is incredibly difficult for people to separate a person's troubling past from a current tragedy. When you know someone has a documented history of violence in a relationship, your mind naturally jumps to the worst possible conclusion. But as we discussed earlier, we cannot let emotion create lies. The initial police findings explicitly reported no signs of foul play. The absence of physical trauma rules out external violence, but it does not establish a definitive medical or chemical cause. Investigators cannot arrest someone based on a bad reputation or public anger. They can only act on physical evidence, and right now that specific kind of evidence simply is not there. Wow, you really have to imagine what it is like for her family right now. They're grieving a daughter, a mother, and a loved one. They are completely surrounded by a storm of public speculation and daily rumors, yet they still do not have a concrete answer about why her heart stopped beating that Sunday afternoon. Because the final answer relies entirely on internal forensic evidence rather than obvious visual clues, investigators had to secure the environment to ensure no stone was left unturned. They could not just walk away from the apartment once the medics packed up their life-saving equipment. They had to transition into a full fact-finding mission. The investigative steps taken after the initial emergency response show exactly why this case remains so open and highly active. Authorities formally requested CCTV footage from the apartment complex. They are looking to establish a clear, verifiable visual timeline of the hours leading up to the 911 call. This is such a critical, necessary step in modern police work. Human memory is deeply flawed, especially during a crisis. If you ask two different people what happened 3 hours before a terrifying emergency, you might get two completely different answers. But a camera does not lie. By pulling the CCTV footage, police can see exactly who was coming and going, what time they arrived, and if there was any unusual or erratic activity leading up to that fatal afternoon. It grounds the timeline in absolute reality. They also went a step further and executed a search warrant at the residence. This means investigators systematically documented and collected evidence to help build a complete understanding of the circumstances. A search warrant in a situation like this is a standard essential tool. It gives law enforcement the legal authority to thoroughly check the premises for anything that might explain a sudden medical emergency. They are looking for anything that could shed light on her final moments, whether that is the specific dosages of medications, environmental hazards, or simple clues about her daily routine. It is a meticulous, careful process of ruling things out one by one. And just as the public was trying to digest these local investigative maneuvers, the scope of the probe expanded unexpectedly, sending shockwaves through the media all over again. On August 19th, a major new development surfaced when ABC News reported that the Drug Enforcement Administration is now assisting the Greenville Police. Sources familiar with the matter confirmed the federal agency's involvement in the ongoing investigation. Predictably, this caused another massive wave of online speculation. When people hear the letters DEA, their minds instantly jump to cartel activity, massive drug rings, or intentional criminal overdoses. But we have to step back, take a breath, and recognize the strict limits of what this actually means in the real world. The DEA's assistance does not prove that an overdose happened, it does not confirm a drug crime, and it absolutely does not imply wrongdoing by any specific person. The DEA did not publicly explain the exact scope of their involvement, and a spokesperson cited elsewhere said the agency typically does not comment on active investigations. Greenville Police remain the lead agency handling the entire case. It is actually very common for local police departments to ask federal agencies for help, simply because agencies like the DEA have access to advanced laboratories, broader databases, and specialized experts who can identify complex chemical compounds much faster than a local, state-level precinct can. It is about getting the most accurate answers, not necessarily building a criminal case. Ultimately, the final answer to this heartbreaking tragedy rests in the hands of the coroner. The official cause and manner of death remain pending further investigation and the completion of additional studies. These studies include complex toxicology tests that can take a significant amount of time to finalize. In fact, CBS reported the coroner said results could take up to 8 weeks, 8 full weeks of waiting. Think about how agonizing that wait must be for the people who actually knew her and loved her. They are sitting in the dark, mourning a profound loss, trying to plan a memorial, all while they wait for a laboratory machine to tell them why they will never see her again. Toxicology is not like television where you get an answer in 10 minutes. It is a slow, methodical scientific process that checks for everything from prescribed medications and over-the-counter drugs to potential interactions that her body just could not handle. Until those conclusive toxicology results are delivered and the coroner officially signs the final document, any claim about a specific cause of death is strictly an unconfirmed rumor. We cannot guess. We cannot assume. We have to wait for the science to speak out of respect for her memory and her family's peace. We set out today to uncover what really happened during those final 40 minutes. We stripped away the gossip and looked only at the verified timeline. The confirmed evidence tells us that Hayden Panettiere was found unresponsive. Responders fought desperately to save her using advanced life support, and dispatch traffic referenced a possible overdose during the chaotic response. We know the autopsy found no contributing trauma, and the initial police investigation found no signs of foul play. But the final definitive medical explanation is still pending. The true story here is not found in the alarming language of a preliminary dispatch call. It is found in the critical difference between what responders initially suspected in the frantic heat of the moment and what the forensic investigation will actually prove when all the facts are finally brought unto the light. It is a tragic story about patience, the search for truth, and the incredibly heavy burden of waiting for real, verified answers. Thank you so much for staying till the end to uncover the verified truth with us. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so now.